The British sovereign is the center of the United Kingdom. What happens when the monarch passes away? The effects spread wide, but it all starts with other members of the royal family.
As my heir, William now assumes the Scottish titles which have meant so much to me. He succeeds me as Duke of Cornwall and takes on the responsibilities.
In the heart of Buckingham Palace, behind gilded doors and guarded whispers, a decision has been made that will change the monarchy forever. The king, frail, silent, and burdened by time, has done the unthinkable. In the stillness of a private chamber, he has handed over the crown, but not to the woman who fought beside him. Instead, to the son who has waited his whole life for this moment. The throne has quietly shifted.
They're pictures that shine a light on a future king, yet feel like a massive contrast to the image Prince William wants to show.
And Queen Camilla's reign has ended before it truly began. But what drove King Charles to break centuries of royal tradition in the dead of night? And what secret truth forced Queen Camilla to walk away from power without a single word? This is not the story of a coronation. It's the story of a quiet revolution, one that began in silence, but will echo through royal history forever. The decision in the dark. It began as a whisper, soft, uncertain, almost too fragile to carry through the marble corridors of Buckingham Palace. Yet it grew, threading its way through chambers and drawing rooms until even the walls seemed to hum with unease. The king had been seen wandering the private gardens long after midnight, his cane tapping rhythmically against the stones, his breath visible in the cold air. Beneath the silver wash of the moon, his face looked ghostly, distant, as if haunted by thoughts too heavy for daylight. He paused beneath the great oak where his mother once sought counsel, and for a long moment, he simply stared at the palace windows, their golden glow flickering like fading embers. The truth pressed upon him. His strength was waning, and time was no longer an ally. The doctor's words echoed endlessly.
We've received breaking news from Buckingham Palace, which has announced that the king has been diagnosed with cancer.
Your Majesty, rest is no longer a suggestion, it's a necessity. But rest was something Charles had forgotten how to do. His mind was not at peace. The weight of the crown had grown unbearable, not just upon his head, but upon his conscience. He'd watched as Camilla struggled to maintain her composure before the cameras, her practiced smile never quite reaching her eyes. Public favor was slipping, the monarchy's image fracturing under quiet discontent. The people demanded change, something real, something that did not wear the ghosts of yesterday's scandals. And deep within, Charles knew that his reign had become an echo of the past, steady, perhaps, but stagnant. The future required youth, vision, and resilience. It required William. That night, in the stillness of his private chamber, Charles reached for a single sheet of parchment. Surrounded by the portraits of ancestors whose gazes seemed to follow him with silent judgment, he pressed his seal into crimson wax. The act was final, irreversible. A monarch's decision was made not for power, but for preservation. He summoned William under the pretense of a quiet family discussion. No advisors, no courtiers, only blood and truth. Camilla entered moments later, her expression serene, unaware of what was to unfold. The flickering firelight caught the red seal upon the envelope resting on the table. Her smile faltered, her breath caught. Charles looked at her with weary eyes. "My reign ends tonight," he said softly. "And the future begins with my son." The air went still, and for a single eternal heartbeat, even the ticking of the royal clock seemed to stop. Then came silence, deafening, endless, and absolute. The fall of the Queen. Queen Camilla stood frozen in the dim light of Buckingham Palace, her reflection caught between shadow and gold. The silence was unbearable, the kind that presses against the chest and steals the breath before words can form. For years, she had fought for this place, enduring headlines dripping with venom. surviving whispers that she'd never belong, and smiling through a nation's reluctant acceptance.
The other woman, a homewrecker, someone who destroyed a modern fairy tale.
Every step she took beside Charles had been a battle for legitimacy. Every wave, every public smile, a shield against judgment. And now, in a single moment, it had all vanished like mist beneath the morning sun. The title she had once dreamed of, the crown that once symbolized victory, now felt like a cruel illusion. The weight of the room seemed to collapse inward, trapping her within the gilded walls she had once thought would protect her. Her eyes found Charles, and for a heartbeat, the years between them, the laughter, the secrecy, the love that had defied a kingdom flashed before her. His expression was weary, remorseful, heavy with the burden of a choice he could not undo. Yet she did not plead. There were no tears, no dramatic gestures, just a quiet stillness, an acceptance born of exhaustion. She had always known that history would never truly absolve her. The ghost of Diana's memory lingered everywhere in the press, in the people, even in Charles himself. Camilla turned toward the rain-splattered window, watching droplets trace uncertain paths down the glass. "So this is how it ends," she whispered, voice steady yet broken. Charles stepped closer, his voice trembling with something between love and guilt. "You saved me when I couldn't stand alone, Camilla," he said softly. "But this is for the monarchy. It must survive even if we don't." His hand reached toward hers, then faltered halfway, as though even comfort had become a forbidden act. The silence stretched between them like a lifetime. By dawn, the decision had been set in motion. Camilla's carriage departed through the palace gates before the city fully woke. The guards saluted, eyes averted, as though witnessing something sacred and sorrowful. Officially, it was announced as a private retreat, a temporary withdrawal for reflection and rest.
King Charles and Prince William making a rare public appearance for a cause that's near and dear.
But behind those diplomatic words lay a truth known only to the royal circle. It was an exile written in elegance. Cameras caught only the glint of the carriage wheels on the wet cobblestone. No royal farewells, no ceremony, only rain, steady and cold, washing away the remnants of her reign before it had even begun. Thousands of miles away in California, the news broke quietly across a glowing screen. Prince Harry sat motionless, the blue light flickering across his face. He didn't move, didn't speak, as the headline scrolled, "King Charles abdicates Prince William to inherit the throne." Below it, a smaller line read, "Queen Camilla withdraws from public duties." Meghan watched him, waiting for a reaction, but he remained silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost reflective. "At least," he murmured, "it's ending the right way this time." There was no bitterness in his tone, just a weary understanding of cycles finally closing. Back in London, William stood alone before the great mirror in his father's private chamber, the same mirror where Charles had once practiced speeches about duty and destiny. The reflection that stared back was not of a prince, but of a king waiting. The past was still echoing around him, yet he knew there was no turning back. With a deep breath, he straightened his shoulders, gazing into his own eyes as if seeing his future unfold. This time, there would be no hesitation. The monarchy had fallen, reshaped, and reborn its next chapter, beginning not with applause, but with quiet resolve. And as the first light of morning flooded the palace, King William took his first step into history. The silent coronation. There were no golden carriages, no thunderous trumpets echoing through London's ancient streets, and no cheering crowds waving Union flags. Instead, the coronation of King William unfolded beneath a hushed sky.
Conservationist, father, and future king.
Inside the secluded chapel deep within the grounds of Buckingham Palace, a place that had seen countless prayers, confessions, and secrets, but never something quite like this. The grand hallways of the palace stood silent, the marble floors glistening under candlelight. Only the faint sound of distant footsteps and the rhythmic toll of the palace clock filled the air. This was not a spectacle for the public eye. It was history rewritten in whispers. The attendees were a few members of the royal family, a handful of loyal attendants, and the Archbishop of Canterbury, whose voice trembled slightly as he recited the sacred vows. The atmosphere was thick with reverence and melancholy. When the Archbishop lifted the crown, the gold seemed dimmer, the jewels less brilliant, as if even the royal regalia understood the gravity of this moment. Slowly, he lowered it onto William's bowed head, the motion deliberate, sacred, final. For the first time in modern memory, a monarch had been crowned in near silence. Outside, the city carried on unaware that the kingdom had already changed hands. No cameras, no parades, no nation united in pomp, only the solemn stillness of transition. Inside, time itself seemed to hesitate. Catherine stood beside William, her face calm but resolute. The candlelight caught the faint shimmer of tears in her eyes as she looked upon the crown resting on her husband's head. It wasn't pride that filled her heart, it was gravity. She understood the cost of the moment. Every jewel, every polished surface of that crown held generations of duty, sacrifice, and sorrow. And now, it rested upon the man she loved, the man who had inherited not just a throne, but the ghosts that came with it. William lifted his gaze toward his father. Charles sat in quiet dignity, his features softened by an emotion that no longer resembled sorrow. For months, he had wrestled with the decision to let go. But now, watching his son take the vow he himself had once taken, there was something almost sacred in his stillness. Peace. The kind that only comes when a burden is finally laid down. The choir's hymn rose softly, echoing through the vaulted ceiling, each note fragile as glass. And when the last sound faded into silence, Charles stood. The movement drew every eye. He approached William slowly, each step measured with the weight of age and memory. The chamber held its breath. Then, with hands that trembled, not from weakness, but from emotion, Charles reached into his coat and withdrew the royal signet ring, a symbol passed from monarch to monarch for centuries.
I speak to you today with feelings of profound sorrow.
He held it between them for a moment before placing it into William's open palm. "Lead not as I did," he whispered, his voice roughened by regret, but as she would have wanted. The room stilled. No one asked who she was. They all knew. Her absence was its own presence, the late Princess Diana, whose shadow and spirit still lingered over every decision, every act of grace or defiance that shaped the monarchy's modern story. It was as if her memory had been waiting for this day for her sons to carry forward not the pain of the past, but the hope she once embodied. Across the ocean, in a sunlit living room in California, Prince Harry watched the private broadcast through a secure royal channel. Meghan sat beside him in quiet reflection. The screen flickered slightly as the crown touched William's head, and for a long time, neither of them spoke. Harry's face was unreadable, caught somewhere between nostalgia and reconciliation. Then, slowly, he lifted his glass not in bitterness or distance, but in silent acknowledgement. "To him," he said quietly, his voice almost breaking, "to my brother." The man who finally ended the cycle, Meghan's hand found his, and they watched together as the ceremony closed not with fanfare, but with peace. Back in London, the sacred rites concluded. The Archbishop lowered his head, the attendants stepped back, and the ancient crown, now warmed by William's touch, seemed to glimmer brighter under the dawn's pale light. William turned, his gaze meeting Catherine's, and for the first time since the decision had been made, a faint smile crossed his face. There was no arrogance in it, no triumph, only calm determination. He had not claimed the throne through conquest or ceremony, but through quiet sacrifice. As the chapel doors opened, The chill morning air swept in, carrying with it the scent of rain and blooming roses from the palace gardens. William stepped outside, the crown catching the first rays of light. The world beyond the gates remained oblivious. No crowds cheered, no bells rang through Westminster. Only the rustle of leaves, the chirping of distant birds, and the soft sigh of the wind bearing witness to a monarchy reborn. He looked toward the horizon where the city began to sit, buses rumbling, lights flickering on, people waking to an ordinary day that would one day be marked as extraordinary in history. Catherine joined him, their hands intertwining quietly. Together they stood before the rising sun, two figures against the vastness of tradition, bound not by ceremony, but by conviction. It was not the roar of an empire that greeted them. It was something far purer, the whisper of a new beginning, carried on the dawn air. And for the first time in a long haunted history, the crown did not feel like a burden. It felt like a promise. The dawn of a new reign. The morning after the great silence at Buckingham Palace, Britain awoke to a nation transformed. Newspapers across the kingdom blazed with the same headline in bold, breathless letters: King Charles steps down, Prince William crowned in private ceremony. It was a headline that didn't just announce news, it rewrote history. No grand procession, no golden coach, no thunder of cannons. The crown had changed hands quietly, under the cover of dawn, and yet the impact was seismic. Commentators called it unprecedented, the end of one era, the rebirth of another. Crowds began gathering outside the palace gates, drawn not by outrage, but reverence. They came not to demand answers, but to witness something Britain had not seen in generations, a monarchy choosing change instead of clinging to power. Far from London's commotion, Camilla sat by the window of her countryside home, her gaze soft and steady as the rain traced silver lines down the glass. Her crown was gone, but her spirit was calm. For years, she had stood in the storm, mocked by tabloids, haunted by ghosts of the past, yet unwavering beside the man she loved. Now, that chapter has closed. She had loved a king and lost a throne, but in that loss, she had found what eluded her for decades. Perhaps this is how it was always meant to end, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't curse fate or history. She simply accepted it, with the quiet grace of someone who had weathered every kind of storm and survived them all. At Sandringham, King Charles was learning to live without a crown. The halls were still, save for the distant hum of the countryside breeze. Gone were the red boxes stacked with state papers, the endless briefings, the ceremonial obligations. His mornings were now spent before an easel, a palette of colors spread before him, his brush gliding over scenes of nature. Afternoons passed with letters, some from his sons, some from friends he hadn't spoken to in years. For the first time in decades, Charles was not a monarch. He was simply a man. The title that had weighed so heavily on him for so long had finally lifted, and in its absence, he found something he hadn't felt in years of freedom. William's visits to Sandringham became more frequent. Their meetings were no longer bound by protocol or formality. They walked the gardens as father and son, talking about everything and nothing at all. Once, Charles looked at his son with a faint smile and said, "You'll do what I could not." William didn't answer. He didn't need to. In that single exchange, decades of distance melted away. When the new king finally addressed the nation, the moment was unlike any in royal history. The cameras focused on him in the grand hall, the crown resting upon his head, but his voice carried no grandeur, only sincerity. "This crown," he began, his words steady and deliberate, "is not a symbol of power, it is a promise. A promise to serve, to listen, and to heal." Across the country, people stopped to hear him on buses, in hospitals, in homes. For the first time in a long time, the monarchy didn't feel like an institution. It felt human. In California, Harry watched the address from his home in Montecito. The moment the speech ended,
Prince Harry and Meghan stepped down from royal duties last year and moved to the United States.
he exhaled deeply, his gaze lingering on the screen. "He's doing it right," he said quietly. A few hours later, a short message appeared online. Every family must find its way back to one another. Ours just did. The world read it as a statement of reconciliation, but to William, it was something deeper. It was peace between brothers, sealed not by words, but by understanding. As dusk settled over London, Buckingham Palace glowed under a golden sky. Crowds lingered outside, candles flickering, flags fluttering gently in the evening wind. No trumpets sounded, no fanfare marked the occasion. Yet somehow, this quiet moment felt more powerful than any coronation before it. From one of the palace windows, King William stood beside Catherine, their silhouettes outlined against the soft amber light. "It doesn't feel like an ending," Catherine whispered. William smiled faintly. "Because it isn't. It's the beginning of something better." And as the royal standard rose over the palace once more, the nation below seemed to exhale in unison. A new chapter had begun, not forged in ceremony, but born of compassion, humility, and unity. In that quiet evening glow, Britain rediscovered what it had almost forgotten, that even crowns, when worn with humanity, can heal the hearts of those who believe in them. History may remember the day King Charles crowned his son in silence as a royal mystery. But those who understand the heart behind the crown know it was something else entirely, a father's final act of love. Because sometimes the loudest revolutions don't happen with shouts or banners. They happen in whispered rooms, between beating hearts, when duty finally bows to destiny. If you believe history always repeats itself inside the palace walls, remember, it begins in silence. Subscribe for more royal revelations.